as a species, we evolved in this microbial dense world, right? Everything around us contained very high levels of microbes. Everything we ate, everything we drank, the environments we were in. And over that period of time, we came to figure out this beautiful relationship between microbes where we give them a home because the human system is a good home for microbes for the most part. And in turn, they provide us functionality.
Let's ditch the quick fix and dive into today's conversation. Welcome, everybody. My guest today is Kiran Krishnan. Kiran is a research microbiologist and has been involved in dietary supplement and nutrition market for over the past 18 years. He comes from a university research background, having spent several years with hands-on research and development in the fields of molecular medicine and microbiology at the University of Iowa. Kiran established a clinical research organization where he designed and conducted dozens of human clinical trials in human nutrition. Kiran is a co-founder and partner at New Science Trading LLC, a nutritional technology development and research company. And Kiran is also co-founder and chief scientific officer at the Microbiome Labs. Welcome, Kiran.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you here. I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I know the listeners will definitely get a lot of information. You've got a lot to bring to the table. And I think it's good just to start right out into your history, to kind of maybe develop it a little bit further than what I just shared, and then kind of lead into probably the microbiome and its connection to the immune system. I think that would be a good place to start.
As you mentioned in the introduction, I'm trained as a research microbiologist. For me, it's always been a normal fit to be in the sciences. Even as a child, I was one of those very curious kids that really needed to understand the world around me and not really kind of take things for granted. If something worked in a way that was fascinating, I had to understand how it did. Both my parents are in the sciences. My mom's a medical doctor. My dad was a microelectronics engineer, so he was big in computer chips and electrical engineering and design around chips and so on. So they had kind of two different spectrums of science. One is the math, physics, hard sciences, and then my mom was more the biological sciences. So I kind of fit somewhere in between. For me, my love is more for the biological sciences, but I love the concepts around engineering and looking at systems, right? So I really think about biology purely as systems biology, and that to me was a great fit in the world of functional medicine, right? Because obviously people know that in conventional allopathic medicine we look at the body in silos, right? So brain doctors only focus on the brain and heart doctors only on the heart, and they don't really see any connections between other body systems, versus most integrative practitioners or holistic or functional practitioners, whatever we want to label it, really look at the body and the person as a whole and everything that influences the outcomes of that person. So to me, when I got into the hard science and the research world and all that, it made a lot more sense to look at everything as a whole, as a system, rather than individual parts. So the navigation into the functional medicine space to me was a natural fit. That's where my understanding of science and biology made the most sense. And then the microbiome was an ideal thing for me because I was always fascinated with what you couldn't see, the forces and the influences of things that you couldn't see, right? So one of my favorite subjects is in the world of quantum mechanics, so quantum physics.
Sure.
And quantum physics is all about the tiny, tiny, tiny things, the subatomic particles and forces that you can't see that really govern everything and influence our world. And that's what led me to microbes too. Microbes are the same way, right? Microbes rule this world in so many different ways. And in every step of what happens on Earth, microbes play a role. Even cloud formation in the sky, right? Those are influenced by microbes in the ocean. And so things that we would never think about are driven by microbes, and they were here a long time before we were. So they've been writing the rules on how cells and all that function before we were. So that was always fascinating to me. The only issue with when you look at microbiology and clinical microbiology in the classic sense is that a lot of it becomes focused around pathogens.
Right.
Right? Organisms that drive disease and infectious organisms and all that. And as exciting as that was, I couldn't help but always think about, wait, there's, probably less than 1% of organisms that have been discovered are actually pathogenic or deliberately harmful, right? 99%, if not more, are actually benign or beneficial. So what about the study on the rest of that? And when the Human Microbiome Project came along, that really was the point of it, was to study all of these commensals and these organisms that live within us, not just the ones that are causing disease, but the ones that are supportive and commensal.
Right.
So
Right.
for me, that was a great navigation too. So both of those worlds collided: the microbiome, my microbiology aspect of it, and then my focus in on functional holistic medicine.
That's very good. It's such an important thing. And I know you have a greater understanding than I do, but I know when I went through my microbiology, it was only about the pathogens. And it's an important thing to study for sure. But it really was incomplete because, like you rightly share, it's a very small percentage of the viral and bacterial community and all others. And it's kind of like some people always kind of get focused on the negative, which can be very, very important to focus on. But most of life is really cool and really awesome. And that includes, all the viral reality and the bacterial reality as well.
Yeah. So, and I think you brought up a great analogy, because a lot of times the negative exists because the positive is not being focused on, right? And that can apply to everything, or just our personal lives and how we view relationships and all that stuff. But that's also true with microbes, right? Pathogens are a way of life. They exist in us, around us, all around us, and they always have, right? The big difference as to whether or not a pathogen creates a problem is what else is around the pathogen. If there are lots of good beneficial bacteria, they will control the pathogen and it can't necessarily do what it wants to do, right? So yeah, absolutely. I think that's an interesting, it's a paradigm shift. And it's applicable to all aspects of life too.
Right, it really is. And so I think there's a couple of different terminologies that I know you use and familiar with: the symbiogenesis and dysbiosis. If we could kind of maybe compare and contrast those two things and develop that a little bit further.
Yeah. So symbiogenesis is this, for lack of a better word, just a beautiful natural process that occurs when organisms are forced to live within a system or within close proximity, right? That was one of my favorite lines from a movie, is in the original Jurassic Park, where the mathematician Malcolm, right, and his line said, "Life will find a way." Right. And nature finds a way, right? Basically, because to put that back into context, the scientists that were looking at the work that this company was doing to recreate dinosaurs, they were asking, like, well, how do you control the population, right? Well, now you create all these dinosaurs and send them out, they're all going to start mating and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And then the scientists said, no, we've engineered them with DNA so that they're all female. And but what they failed to look at is that anywhere there were genetic gaps, they inserted frog DNA, and a number of frog species have the ability to spontaneously mutate sex, right? And so that's where the whole movie ensues. But it illustrates that statement that he said, that nature finds a way, and true. That's absolutely true when you look at symbiogenesis as well. When you put organisms together for the purpose of survival and for the purpose of propagation and all that, the organisms will tend to find a way to work together in a symbiotic manner, because it's better for both parties rather than the antagonistic relationship. And we are a perfect example of that, because as a species, we evolved in this microbial dense world, right? Everything around us contained very high levels of microbes. Everything we ate, everything we drank, the environments we were in. And over that period of time, we came to figure out this beautiful relationship between microbes, where we give them a home, because the human system is a good home for microbes for the most part. And in turn, they provide us functionality, right? And now we can estimate that a majority of the functionality of being human is derived from microbial DNA and microbial capabilities. So it's this beautiful symbiogenesis that occurred over a period of time to create what we call a holobiome, which is a superorganism, right? A human being is actually a superorganism. We're like a walking, talking rainforest where we are made up of thousands of other organisms that all have to work together in order to perpetuate the health of the whole. And there's crosstalk going on between all the different organisms in different parts of our body. There are symbiotic relationships in terms of one organism makes a compound, the other one utilizes it, and then makes something else from it that another one uses, and so on. All of that is happening in this human host, and all of it supports the host, right? So that's the symbiogenesis part of it.
Right.
Dysbiosis is a general term for when that symbiogenic organism goes out of balance, right? And the whole key thing to symbiogenesis is there's a key balance in what functions are happening and at what rate and for what reason. And the moment any of those things go out of balance, where you have too much of one function and not enough of another, you end up with a disproportionate leaning towards a specific phenotype, which means that an outcome that may be not favorable, right?
Right.
And that is exactly what dysbiosis is. I'll give you an example of this. When you look at the gut lining, right, a very important structure within the gut lining is the mucosa. That's the mucosal layer, right? That acts as a physical barrier between the outside world, which is the tube in the digestive tract, and the inside world, which is the blood circulation, right? So the mucosa acts as a physical barrier. It's also how you trap things like toxins and pathogens and all that to get it out of the body. It's also a conduit for communication between the microbiome and the immune system, and lots of great crosstalk happens there, and we can dig into that a little bit more. Now, so many diseases, I would say the vast majority of chronic illnesses can be traced back to that mucosal layer being diminished to some degree, right? And the diminishing of the mucosal layer can cause conditions as severe as colorectal cancer, which the survival rates for are not great. And it can cause things like food intolerances, right? Which seem a little bit more benign than colorectal cancer, but it's the same pathology. So the mucosal layer shrinking is really an imbalance between microbes that eat away at the mucus layer versus microbes that rebuild it, right? And you need to have both. You need microbes that eat away at it to stimulate rebuilding. But then if you have microbes that eat away at it too much without enough microbes that rebuild it, then you get this net destruction of the mucus layer, and then you have all this disease risk, right? So that's an example of dysbiosis, an imbalance in functionality. Symbiogenesis is the original establishment of the mucosa and the balance between microbes that eat and microbes that rebuild.
That's very good. And, I have always in my office shared with my patients that the largest organ in the body is the skin. And after studying and prepping for a conversation with you, you've rightly shared that actually the largest organ in the body is the mucosal lining.
Yeah.
It's pretty massive. I think the number I remember you sharing is like 4,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Which is an amazing number. And the complexity of the mucosa, when we think about what it has to do to take good things in, assimilate things, take bad things out, it's mind-boggling, the complexity of your gut, which a lot of people only think of it as just some kind of a transport tube from your mouth to the rectum.
Right.
It's so much more than that, and so important.
I always call it kind of the central command center for how the rest of your body functions, because the gut, and this then relates to the immune system, the gut is the largest sampling site of the body. It's the way in which the inside of the body, every aspect of the inside of the body learns about the environment that you're in, right? So it's its role cannot be minimized at all. It's arguably one of the most important functions.
Yeah, it's right up there. Central nervous system and in the neurology of the gut is amazing. So there's been a lot of talk about natural immunity this last couple of years specifically, and the gut has a big impact on developing natural immunity. How does how does natural immunity really work in just its basic concepts? And is natural immunity, superior than any other form of immunity? I guess is one of the questions.
Yeah, I mean, our immune system is designed to continuously learn about the environment around us, and what we're being bombarded with, what we're being exposed to, and then the immune system is also supposed to learn whether or not those things that we're being exposed to or bombarded with are things that the immune system has to deal with, or things that the immune system should ignore, right? And that's an equally important outcome, right? Because one thing that's equally dangerous as an immune system that doesn't really work to protect the host is an immune system that works too much to protect the host, right? Then we get things like sensitivities, allergies, asthma, autoimmune conditions, and so on.
Right.
So that, again, that's another aspect of balance. But natural immunity is the progression of teaching the immune system about new things that are coming into the system. And natural immunity is designed to provide somewhat of a broad spectrum of protection against not just a singular target, but a potential variation of that target as well, right?
Right.
Which is interesting. So let's say you're exposed to a novel virus, something that your body hasn't really seen exactly before.
Right.
The first part of the immune system that responds is called the innate immune system. The innate immune system gets to the site of action wherever the virus is trying to infect. And then the innate immune system's goal is to try to reduce the viral load and contain it to that area, right? But it does so in a non-specific way. The innate immune system doesn't actually know what the infectious agent is, right? It knows where it is because of signals actually from the microbiome that indicate where the problem is. The innate immune system shows up and just starts bombarding everything in that area. The analogy I give is like it's like killing a mosquito with a blowtorch, right? And you're going to kill the mosquito, but you're going to burn the wall a little bit as well.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why then the innate immune system is only supposed to function for a relatively short amount of time, 24, 48 hours, maybe a little bit longer than 48 hours, but not much more than that, because that's blowtorching in the system. And we're going to burn the wall and burn down the house if we do that for too long. So then once the innate immune system is trying to contain it, there are these innate immune cells called dendritic cells and macrophages that are supposed to come to the site of action and start picking up debris and components of things to present to the adaptive immune system, which is a more specific part of the immune system, to present to them to say, hey, this is likely what we're dealing with here, right? Now, just like any other system, there can be mistakes where the dendritic cells and macrophages may accidentally pick up your own tissue because that's part of the debris of all the damage that's occurred, and accidentally present your own tissue to the immune system as the target. That then leads to autoimmune response, right? But there's a checks and balances system there that the microbiome is a part of, and we could talk about that in detail. But let's say the dendritic cells pick up the right thing, picks up the part of the virus, and then presents it to the adaptive immune system. The adaptive immune system goes, okay, that's the target. We got it. We can start building immune response against that specific target, and they do so by upregulating these cells called B cells. And then they also upregulate T cells that become specific to that target, right? Yeah. But the B cells produce what we've all come to know as antibodies, right? Now, antibodies are been in the news, and as we talk about the pandemic and so on. And the thing of it is, it's interesting when you look at the antibodies. They have a very conserved heavy chain layer, which is the base layer of the antibody. There's a V component to it. The upper part of it is the part that actually binds to the virus or bacteria. That part has some variable regions where the structures can change a little bit to meet different targets, right? Okay. What's interesting about how antibodies get produced, now you've got a B cell that has the specific target, this new virus, and the B cell goes, okay, I'm going to produce antibodies exactly to this virus. But as it's doing that, it's also accidentally making some mistakes, right? And those mistakes are welcome because those mistakes do help create variations in the antibodies that may bind to further variations in the virus. right? So those are welcome biological mistakes that are actually built into the system to create some variability, because the system knows that that virus that we're now targeting is likely going to change.
Going to mutate.
Not too far from now, it's going to mutate, right? That's what all biological entities do that, and mutations favor development and favor progression and so on. So the same way the virus may mutate, your antibodies can accidentally mutate and create new variety versions as well. So then you've got B cell that's producing this array of antibodies against that particular virus, and some of the antibodies it produces may not bind that very virus, but may bind a new version of the virus. And then the B cells keep secreting those antibodies into your system. So now you've got floating around antibodies all over your system, so that when you encounter that virus again, the dendritic cells will grab it right away and then present it to the adaptive immune system. And the adaptive immune system goes, we got a guy that works on that, activate that B cell, and then it starts releasing more of those antibodies, and those antibodies will bind and neutralize it and take care of the problem in much shorter order than it did the first time, right? So that's essentially natural immunity. Now, a lot of that natural immunity should be long-term as well. That B cell should last for a while. Some of the T cells that are produced against the new virus will also last for some time. So natural immunity is the most fundamental way of developing resilience against pathogens. We do it all the time, right? Without thinking about it. It gets spotlighted when we're dealing with things like a pandemic that become political and all of that, right?
Right.
But we're doing natural immunity all day long, right? I mean, the fact that we're not sick 90% of the time means that we have natural immunity protecting us against things that we're constantly coming in contact with.
A functional system. I appreciate that definition. It's really, really important. And so getting back into how the immune system is impacted negatively by the health of the gut. And one of the common diagnoses out there is the leaky gut. Mm-hmm. And so how does that impact the mucosal specifically? What's happening there, and how does that impact our immune system? And how do we, we'll get into some of the things we want to get into as far as helping repair and stabilize and strengthen, through nutrition, supplements, things of that nature. But what's some of the, impacts of leaky gut and other disruptions of the health of the mucosa?
Yeah. So one of the analogies I give to people, because this becomes a very complex topic, right? Immunology to begin with is a highly complex topic. And then you've got microbiology and microbiome science, which is complex. And when you bridge the two of them, they become uber complex. But there's some very easy to understand high level things that people can appreciate. Number one, I always give the analogy that the microbiome are the eyes and the ears of the immune system. Right, the microbiome acts as the neighborhood watch, if you will, and for one of the reasons for that, and this is another great example of symbiogenesis, where over time we realize that we don't want an immune system that's always on, always active, always attacking things. Right, that's not good for survival. We do want an immune system that's ready, that has capabilities, but only gets triggered with certain alarms, right? It's no different than firefighters sitting in the firehouse waiting for the fire alarm. You don't have firefighters just roaming the neighborhood looking for fires all the time, right? All of the firefighters, right? And there's monitoring systems and all that, and our immune system has monitoring systems, but we don't need the immune system activated with alarms blaring, driving around all the time.
Right.
So the microbiome actually is everywhere, right? Every square millimeter of your body is covered with microbes. And the local microbiome in different tissues act as the neighborhood watch. So let's take the lungs, for example, right? If you end up getting exposed to a pathogen in the lungs, let's say a flu virus or something like that, when the flu virus enters into the system, it first starts to infect through the lung mucosa. Now, the first things to notice that there's a new virus there that's trying to disrupt the system are the microbes in that area. And the microbes in that area start to signal to the immune system that, hey, there's a virus here, you need to get over here and start functioning. So it's sending off that alarm, right? Mm-hmm. And then the faster that can happen, the better off the host is, because then the virus has less time to infect cells, multiply, damage cells, and create huge viral load, right? The bigger the viral load, when the immune system comes, the bigger the response is going to be from the immune system, right? And when the immune system starts to respond, that innate part of the immune system we talked about earlier, that's when you start to feel sick, right? Until then, the virus can be replicating, infecting cells. You won't feel a thing. You are pre-symptomatic at that point, right? Then when the immune system finally realizes what's going on and starts attacking, that's when the fever, the lethargy, the body aches, and all the other stuff starts to show up. Those are all symptoms of the immune response against the agent. So the goal here is to get early detection of the presence of invading organisms. That is done by the microbiome, right? Mm-hmm. And then getting and recruiting the immune system there early so that the immune system can start to control the infection before it gets out of control. And then shifting from that blowtorching type of immune response to the adaptive immune response, which is much more specific, right? And in the middle of that shift, there is an anti-inflammatory and cleanup step that is supposed to occur, because we want to bring down all the inflammation that the innate immune response used to try to contain the problem. And then we want to start cleaning up all of the debris that occurred from our own tissues getting damaged, right? And the cleanup is important because we don't want our own tissue proteins floating around where a dendritic cell may accidentally grab it and present it, right? And we also want to have a check system for the dendritic cell accidentally grabbing and presenting our own tissues. Now, I describe all of that because it's in all of those steps that a healthy microbiome plays a role, right? And the early detection part is the first step. And that's one of the key areas in which leaky gut really disrupts immune response. And I'll explain why. So when I mentioned that the first thing that detects the presence of the virus is the local microbes, right? And they start signaling to the immune system to make their way there. How do they signal to the immune system? Well, they signal to the immune system by using inflammatory markers. It's like shooting up a flare, right? That says, hey, come pay attention. Or in the case of our early analogy, it's like turning on a fire alarm. And then the firefighters then know where to go, right? The immune system knows where to go. Exactly, that's their call. So they know where to go. Now, here's a big problem with leaky gut. Leaky gut causes inflammatory responses throughout the body, right? Leaky gut is one of the biggest drivers of systemic inflammation. The problem with systemic inflammation is the type of inflammatory markers that are elevated when you have leaky gut are exactly the same inflammatory markers that the microbes try to use to signal to the immune system when something is infecting, right? So it becomes extremely confusing to the immune system when there are alarms everywhere, right? Because of leaky gut. So the analogy I give is, imagine that there's a neighborhood of 500 homes, right? And of course, all homes have fire alarms in them. And one home starts to get a small smoldering fire and enough smoke to turn on the fire alarm, right? But at the same time, all the other 499 homes have fire alarms going off, right? It'd be impossible for the fire engine to know which home to make it to, right? Until the fire starts to get big enough where they can actually see the smoke from the actual house that's on fire to make their way there. Mm-hmm. That's what tends to happen in the body, right? If you have alarms going on everywhere and you've got one actual area of infection that needs attention, the immune system cannot find that spot with all the alarms going on everywhere else until it becomes such a big problem that they can see the smoke and see it burning. Then the immune system gets there, and then the immune response becomes really robust, right? And that's when people start to go into the danger of things like the cytokine storm and so on, because that early blowtorch type of immune response is now amplified because the problem has become bigger. So that's one really simple way to think about leaky gut compromising immune response. It completely confuses the immune system as to where to focus and where to go.
Yeah, that's very good, and I appreciate the analogies there. The other question that comes to my mind in the suggestion that the leaky gut also makes you more susceptible to having, an infectious response that you typically wouldn't have. And is that
Yep.
kind of in that same kind of conversation there?
Absolutely, because and for a couple of reasons, right? One, because the immune system will take longer to find the infectious agent, right? So, in imagine somebody that doesn't have leaky gut, doesn't have the 500 alarms going off all over the place. The virus comes in, it starts to infect the microbiome. It attracts the immune system. Immune system finds it within a very short amount of time, which could be hours, maybe a day or two. And before the virus has the capability of replicating in a significant way, the immune system comes in, quarantines it, takes care of it, shows it to the adaptive response. Antibodies are produced. The person maybe feels bad for 1 or 2 days, maybe just a little bit off, but they're okay, right? And that person's immune system handled that just well. Another person who's got leaky gut and 500 alarms going off all over the place, the virus comes in, even though it's being signaled by the microbiome, the virus actually has 7-10 days to replicate before the immune system can actually make its way there effectively. So now when it does, the viral load is much bigger and the response from the immune system is much bigger. So that person's going to feel more profoundly more sick and feel sicker for a longer period of time because it's going to take the body much longer to now contain this bigger viral load. Right.
Right.
So our thoughts of susceptibility have to change a little bit because, we use when we say we get sick, right, we're typically talking about the immune response to the illness, right? And when we say somebody got sick with it or somebody didn't get sick with it, it doesn't mean that that person didn't get infected, right? The person that may not have experienced illness still got infected, but their immune system dealt with it, right? The person that did experience significant illness, they also got infected, but their immune system was compromised in that it couldn't deal with it soon enough and profoundly enough. And the big difference between those two people is likely the microbiome, because there's another aspect of this, right? When I talked about earlier, I said, there's most of the microbes are beneficial or commensal, and then there are some microbes that are problematic. The problematic microbes, if you happen to have an imbalance of microbes in your system and you have too much of the problematic microbes, the last thing the problematic microbes want to do is attract the immune system to that area, right? It's no different than a neighborhood watch. And if one of the houses in the neighborhood watch actually has criminal activity going on inside it, and they see something suspicious on the street, they're not going to want the cops there, right? Because they don't want to be illuminated themselves.
Right.
So when you have a dysfunctional microbiome, you'll have all these regions in your body where you have overgrowth of opportunistic organisms. They are not going to signal the immune system when something is invading the system there, right? So not only do you have the risk of lost signaling, meaning too many alarms going off because of leaky gut and taking a long time to find the right signal, you can also have it where there are microbes in parts of your body that aren't going to alert the immune system for you. Yeah. In both of those cases, that person's much more susceptible to getting infected and getting more profoundly sick.
Yeah, and so I appreciate that. And I'm going to try to draw an analogy here, and you can correct me when I go off the rail on it. But essentially, when somebody's got a pretty strong immune system, they might be totally asymptomatic. I mean, like you said, or they might have been off a day or a couple of days. Somebody else's system is off pretty terribly, and they're gonna get sick, and they're gonna have the symptoms. It's going to go down the road. And in the analogy, that's kind of a little bit what we've been talking about the last couple of years, because there's been the spotlight on the pandemic, where you've got the comorbidities, and they're typically related to that scenario where, hey, the system is off, there's a fire alarm going off everywhere, and that's what's happening in that scenario. Is that kind of close to that reality there?
Absolutely. And the whole thing about comorbidities for people to understand is, and we're talking about comorbidities like hypertension, diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, right? So then the question becomes, why is it that somebody with diabetes is 10 times more likely to die from this virus than somebody who's not, right? What is it about diabetes that compromises the immune response? Well, it's nothing about blood sugar control that compromises the immune response. So it's nothing about the disease itself. The reason why somebody with diabetes has such a high susceptibility to a bad outcome is because diabetes is also driven by leaky gut and chronic low-grade inflammation, right? So having diabetes is an indication that you have chronic low-grade inflammation and leaky gut, which means you do have fire alarms going off everywhere, which means it's much harder for the immune system to deal with the new incoming virus.
Right.
Same thing with hypertension, same thing with heart disease, right? Imagine you have, atherosclerosis. Then the question becomes, wait, why is it that, some clogging in one or two arteries compromises your whole immune system? Well, it's not. That's not why atherosclerosis is a comorbidity for a poor outcome. It's because atherosclerosis was also caused by leaky gut, also caused by systemic inflammation, right? And so it's just an indicator that you have systemic inflammation.
Right.
Age is the same thing, right? So you think about age was a specific risk factor in the pandemic, and you go, why is it? Is it just because over time your immune system gets tired and doesn't function right? Nope, that's not why. It's because as you age, you lose diversity in your microbiome in the modern world because of longer time exposure to things that hurt your microbiome. And when you lose diversity, you actually become more susceptible to leaky gut and chronic low-grade inflammation. So it's another condition that indicates the presence of chronic low-grade inflammation.
Yeah.
And sure enough, when they did microbiome studies as it relates to the pandemic, they showed in 4 major studies that were published that dysbiosis, and dysbiosis defined by low diversity, low levels of protective keystone strains that manage that intestinal lining, when you have low levels of those organisms, your susceptibility to hospitalization and death was much, much higher when it came to COVID. So it all speaks to how prevalent and unhealthy gut dysfunction is in our society, right? It compromises people's ability to function.
Hey, everybody. I hope you really enjoyed our conversation so far with Kiran Krishnan. We're going to pick up next time and finish the conversation. If you know anybody that's on the health path journey, don't hesitate to send them on over to Ditch the Quick Fix, where there's more information, and that's at ditchthequickfix.com. We'll see you next time when I finish my conversation with Kiran Krishnan. Have a great day.